stuff. So on slide 4, if you are struggling with pacing, which is how fast you get through a unit, you know, that day-to-day thing, would you let us know what are you struggling with? And then on slide 5, if you have a struggle with scope and sequence, which you may not if your district already has something established and it's working, you may not be struggling with that. But if that's something that's on your mind, let us know too. All right, so see some pacing, some common pacing issues. Some of them we can help you with a little bit. Some of them are just the nature of NGSS, and we'll talk about that. It takes longer than expected, absolutely. And we just had this discussion yesterday at one of our meetings. Many of our units, the estimated times are incredibly optimistic. Like they're just probably not realistic at all. And one of the things we are thinking about considering at some point is going through and changing those estimated days. So that is a reality. Those estimated days, for the most part, I would not look at them. You can look at them in the new unit 6.7 because I worked on that and I did use my teacher experience and change those days. And Lindsay and I worked on unit 6.3 over the summer. And so sometimes the classroom teacher view, you know, we add a few extra days for each lesson because we know all the stuff that happens in between. Finding a rhythm. Yeah, you have lots of interruptions. We'll talk about that. Special ed students. Yeah. I know some classes. I used to teach the same class 4 times a day, and huge variations depending on how many kids were in the class, what their needs were. You know, some things you got done with one class would get done in 20 minutes and another class would take 40 minutes. Snow days, low attendance days. Yes, so frustrating. One of the things that used to really drive me crazy is, you know, my principal didn't think there was any problem with, you know, hey, let's pull, you know, all the art kids are going on a field trip. Well, okay, great. Now I just lost a day. Or all the band kids are going, okay, great, but I lost a day. So, and we'll talk about how some of that's not in your scope, in your circle of control. All right, scope and sequence. I don't see anything here. So I won't spend a ton of time on that. Unless there is somebody who does, unless you do have a concern and you just haven't gotten there yet. I know, especially when districts first adopt MyStar, and several years ago, when a lot of districts were looking for an NGSS curriculum for the first time, the expectations were that you could teach 6 or 7 units in a year. MyStar had that expectation, and then reality kind of slapped us in the face. And so we've developed some advice and some recommendations. And especially if you are getting pressured by, you know, someone in your administration, you know, to do more, we have some advice for you. Some districts are mixing up the grade level units. Yes, we did that in my district. When we adopted, we had a lot of pushback. It was earlier in the NGSS days, you know, around 2017-ish, 2018, a lot of people were dragging their feet. And so one of the deals that we made was, if we could adopt an NGSS curriculum, we would put all the life science in 7th grade because that's what 7th grade was used to teaching. So a lot of the 6th grade units were taught in 7th grade, and we moved some of the earth science in 7th grade down to 6th grade because that's what they're used to. So yes, you can do that up and down a grade level. 3 units is realistic. Yeah, that probably is realistic. Unless they happen to be the super short units. We have some that are coming out, especially these last few that are like 5 or 6 lessons total instead of 10. But yeah, 3 is probably realistic considering, you know, if you're adding off the shelf lessons and if you have a million interruptions and stuff like that. So here's what we'll talk about today. We'll talk about expectations. Scope and sequence struggles, we'll kind of, I'll just give you some resources real quick, because it seems to be not a huge struggle right now. But we'll talk about realistic planning, and then we'll have a little reflection and question and answer and that kind of thing, and then we'll be done for the evening. So I'd like you to think about expectations, though. Teachers put expectations on themselves, and then administration put some expectations on teachers. In my experience as a teacher leader, quite often those expectations that the teachers had for themselves were much higher, much more stringent than what administration expected. So in terms of pacing and scope and sequence, so we're thinking of pacing as that day-to-day planning. You know, how many days does it take you to get through a lesson, those kinds of things. And then scope and sequence is that broad, what are we doing in 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade, how many units, that kind of thing. So in terms of pacing and scope and sequence, I am going to, there's only 4. Do we have 5 people now? We have 5.
6.
Oh, we have 6. Awesome. Then I'm going to make 2, I'll make two breakout rooms. And if you're in breakout room 1, you'll be team 1 on slide 9, and breakout room 2 will be on slide 10. So if you would just chat, say hi to each other, introduce yourselves a little bit again, and then think about what are teachers expecting of themselves and what do we feel others expect of us. All right, everybody's back. Thanks. All right, so team 1, I saw trying to teach the students all standards, even when we're told just to hit critical concepts. So a word about critical concepts. The big thinkers in NGSS will tell you that there's no such thing as power standards in the NGSS. And that's a really hard thing for administrators to understand. So you're better off using a coherent unit with a lot of, you know, opportunities for students to use SEPs and CCCs than you are just trying to teach certain disciplinary content in isolation because it's a power standard or a critical standard. And then teach children as though there's no difference in what they bring to the picture. Yeah, and that again is hopefully a misunderstanding of NGSS. I think NGSS pretty much encourages us to, you know, bring kids into the picture as much as possible. We'll talk about higher test scores too, and teaching 4 units. Yeah, and 3 might be all that you get to. I taught middle school science for 25 years. I started under Magosi, which is way back, like in the 90s, in the mid 90s, and then we had the Hissies and the Glickies, and then we had NGSS in my career, and I never taught everything I was supposed to, ever. I taught 3 units, and the 4th unit, my teaching partner and I would laugh. Yeah, we always teach weather the last 2 weeks of school in June, right? We just never got to it. So you're not alone there. So scope and sequence, again, that's that big at the district level, kind of putting that together. What are you going to teach? Here's just some food for thought if you feel that you're being pressured to teach more than you possibly can. The Michigan Science Standards, which are the NGSS, they just adopted it pretty much word for word. They added something about the Great Lakes in one of them. There are 59 performance expectations. And I remember being at NSTA, must have been maybe 2013 or 2014, NGSS had just come out, and I went to a session that was hosted by one of the guys who was one of the authors of the standards, the framework, and he showed us these standards, and I was like, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm telling you that's too much for middle school. And he's like, no, it's not. We really cut it down. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. And I think of that all the time because it's still too much. If you need this for a conversation, and I can always help you have that conversation too, but the experts all over the place in science, in the science world and outside the science world are like, you know what, we have too many standards in general, and specifically in the NGSS, we can't teach it all. We have to stop worrying about it. And then national academies, which published the framework, did a 10-year follow-up paper that they published a couple of years ago. And I was like, first thing I was looking for, I'm like, can they admit there's too much? And I found this nice little quote. Yeah, it's still challenging to make time for students to engage with all of them, right? So across the world, across the country, nobody's getting all 59 in middle school. It is possible to touch all of the SEPs repeatedly in the CCCs. And that ends up being the key to good science literacy. So if you're struggling, MyStar does have a scope and sequence option document. It's actually a slide set, and you can download it. We recommend 4 units, and then the other 3 are, optional. You can swap them out if you would like to. And those are based on kind of a broad, getting a good taste of the different CCCs and SEPs within those content areas. But there's lots and lots of options. And we do have in that same document some guidance if you're going through this and you don't know what's in all the units or what they're all about. We are going to go through and adapt our length because we've rewritten all of our units now. And one of our goals in rewriting them was to make them shorter. So what ended up happening is we really looked for lessons that could be combined. And a lot of times now our lessons have 2 Uncover share cycles instead of, before that was 2 separate lessons, which would take an extra 2 or 3 days to go through all the Anchor, Connect, all that stuff. And we've just put those lab experiences together in a double Uncover share cycle. So we've saved some time there. Questions about scope and sequence? Okay. I'm always happy if, it comes up in your district and or your region or whatever, and you are like, yeah, what do you guys think about that? What do you have prepared? What have you thought of? We have lots and lots of resources, and I can help you think that through. All right, so let's talk about pacing, because I think, based on what you guys told us at the beginning, this is the struggle that we have now day to day. So in general, districts have made those decisions about what you're going to teach, even though you probably can't do 4, you might just be doing 3. But what's happening on this day-to-day thing? Why do these units seem to take forever? And so there's a couple of things I think that are going on. Some of them we can control and some of them we can't. So I think that in general, people outside the classroom and maybe even teachers don't think about tallying up or totaling all of the times that your classroom is interrupted. Nobody gets 180 days of instruction. Nobody, right? The first week of school is you write it off. The last week of school, you write it off. The week before Christmas, you write it off. The week, there's so many things that happen where we lose instructional time. And so if we go at this with why can't we teach 4 units in 180 days, let's start right now with we don't get 180 days. And so I would like you to think about, I put some pictures here, but I'd like you to think about all of the things that happen to you that cause you to lose a day of instruction or slow down, or you lose half a day. And I'm thinking even of things like my principal would just all of a sudden say, oh yeah, tomorrow, second hour, we're having a fire drill. Well, great. I have 4 classes. I teach the same thing, second, third, fourth, fifth hour. Now my second hour is going to miss half of it. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to slow everybody down. So I basically lost a half a day of instruction because you chose to do a fire drill. You got to do fire drills. I got it. But, or we're going to have an assembly for the, fundraiser, 6th hour next week. Great. I'm going to lose a day. So, anyway, I'm going to put you back in your groups. And if you could just brainstorm, I want you to just kind of think about all of these times, even if you just think, in the last 2 or 3 weeks or, last month or so of your own classroom, when have you lost time and for what? Full days and parts of days. All right. So I'm going to put you in a group so you can chat a little bit. And please put some stuff on those slides, slide 23 or 24, depending on if you're in room 1 or 2. All right. Thanks. Yeah, while you guys were writing, I was jotting down things off the top of my head too. So standardized testing takes up a ton of time. Snow and cold days, we've had a lot of those. Field trips, even if it's, only I mean, it's almost worse if it's only a few kids going, the band goes on a field trip or the art kids or whatever, but you're missing 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 kids per class. So it's not worth going forward, especially with the kind of teaching that we're doing. We're being there, having that consensus discussion and those lab experiences is really important. It becomes hard to keep going when a bunch of kids are gone. Assemblies, breakfast, safety drills, getting back into a regular routine, right? You lose that first week, you lose days after each break. Reteaching materials from breaks, yep. Or even if you give an assessment and you're like, oh man, my kids need some reteaching, and we have those options available, we have those materials, but that's going to add time, right? If you did the readings, the differentiated readings, which we list them as optional, but if you do those in class, which might be the only way your kids do them, that's going to, every time you do that, you're going to add a day to that lesson. So, those kind of things happen. Snow substitutes. Yeah, God forbid you need to have a substitute. I used to drive me crazy too. I'd get a call and they'd be like, we need you to come to an IEP 5th hour and we'll cover your class. I'm like, great. Now I just lost a day, or half a day or whatever, because whoever's covering the class can't teach it the way it needs to be taught. And now my other classes are, out of whack. So intercession, vacation, renorming the day after. Yep. Field trips, half days. Sometimes we have those for whatever reason. Nobody asked us. They just decide. Assemblies, fire drills, picture day, testing, club meetings, sports pictures. Yep. I used to have kids. My school started a little later and ended a little later because we didn't have buses in my district. And, but that meant anybody who was playing a sport missed the last hour of the day every single time they had an away game, right? Behavior, sure, absolutely. You can lose a whole day for stuff like that. I had registration day. They used to do registration through science class. We used to have reward days and pep assemblies for our PBIS program. Band practice, they would pull all the 6th graders to practice together before a band concert. So I'd lose all my kids for a day. Sub days, career days, IEP meetings, all kinds of stuff. So you're losing, you don't have 180 days, right? So one of the things that I was gifted with when I was a young teacher was a teacher with a lot of experience. I'd be all flustered, like I had this great lab plan and now, we have a fire drill. What's going on? And she said, Chris, it's the will of the organization. You gotta let it go. It's the will of the organization that you don't teach science today. You gotta let it go. And so if you think about this circle of influence idea, which is an idea that they use it in 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, but it's in a lot of different kind of psychology spaces. You have a circle of control. Those are things you can directly control. A circle of influence, some things that, hey, if you speak out about it, it might change. Sometimes I'd call my principal, like, this is really not a good time. Have you thought about that? And he'd go, oh yeah, let's do it a different day. And then circle of concern, it irritates you, but you don't have control over it. And so if you wouldn't mind in the chat, for the most part, most of these things that you listed here, are these things that are in your circle of control, your circle of influence, or your circle of concern? For the most part. So go ahead and just drop something in the chat. What do you think? All those things you just listed. Yeah, I agree. Yep. Yeah, so mostly we're talking about stuff that's in your circle of concern. It irritates you, it frustrates you, but really it's the will of the organization. And so if you're having a conversation with your admin about why you can't teach 4 units, you know, an exercise like this might be useful. Nobody's fault. It's the way things are. We have to do all these things in school. You know, a lot of them are outside of your principal's control also. But we need to remember that we don't have 180 days. We have a lot less than 180 days, maybe 150 days, maybe, which, you know, that's a whole month, 5 weeks or whatever of school, 6 weeks of school, which there's your unit, right? All right. Another thing that happens with teachers often is we add things because we have things that we love or sound really fun or, you know, are perfect to go along with the unit. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but if you add things, your unit's going to take a little longer to get through. So I absolutely have a fangirl crush on Bill Nye, and I have for 30 years. And I would use a Bill Nye video every chance I got. And I still did, even when I taught MyStar. I used it on those days when we had the band trip or whatever. But if you're adding it into the middle of the day, you know, the middle of the unit on a regular basis, that your unit's going to take a little longer. So if you like Brain Pop, I love Brain Pop. We had a subscription to Brain Pop, used it often. Quizlet, Kahoot. If you're talking about current science events, not a bad thing, but, you know, realize that's going to add time. Oftentimes teachers have an old favorite engaging lab or demo that they just can't give up. You know, kids love it, no worries, but know that it's going to add time. If you spend a lot of time on vocabulary quizzes or test review games, or you do science note taking beyond the unit summary table, all of those things are adding to that unit, right? So they're not in the unit, but they're going to add and make it blow up a little bit. So on slide 29 and 30, they're both the same. I just given you lots of space. If you would list, you know, what do you add? And then if somebody lists something that you add, you can grab a star and add it to that sticky note. So 29 and 30, you know, what do you add? All right. So substituting the local flood video, that's awesome. I would say if you're substituting it too, you're not really adding, you're just making it place-based, and that is awesome.
But I do take a couple of minutes to explain on the map where it's at so that they get that feel. So it does add just a touch here and there. And then once in a while we get a little off track with the conversation, but then I have everybody wanting to know more.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it's one of those trade-offs. Am I actually losing anything when I gain attention enough that I can actually teach the next part?
Making things place-based is always a good investment in time, in my opinion. Absolutely. Supplemental readings or videos, and maybe that's because your kids need them. One of the reasons we added the differentiated reading guides was because we were hearing from teachers, you know, my kids need that opportunity to read. They need the opportunity to, you know, kind of review things sometimes. SEL, yep, got a lot of that, a huge need for that. And it's good and valuable, but it's going to, you know, slow you down in your teaching a little bit. Socratic seminars, Jeopardy, review games, not a bad thing, but when MyStar says this is a, you know, a 6-week unit and it ends up being 8 weeks or 7 weeks or something, you know, some of those things are adding to that count. We don't account for that when we tell you how long we think it's going to be. And Blooket, I'm not sure what Blooket is.
It's a review game.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's like Kahoot.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So not a bad thing, but it is going to add some time. All right. So the decision.
Can I pop one in there though? Because I have used the Kahoot and I created those for the sub to run so that at least they were still on my curriculum, even though it was iffy. At least I was creating the questions and I was able to control it to some extent.
One thing that I would ask if you're using Kahoot or something like that is that you make sure that you make your questions private, because we occasionally get emails from people in other areas who are like, my kids Googled this and they got all the answers to the question. Like, because sometimes people will take the actual questions, from the assessments and put them in their Kahoot, and then they don't make it private. So,
Oh,
in my,
I don't use the word for word verbatim. I do things that are similar
okay, and that's fine.
because I use the assessments myself.
Yeah.
No.
We just found that a few times teachers were just popping, some of those parts of the assessments directly in there. And then it does actually technically violate our usage agreement.
Right.
And it's just not good for everybody whose kids can Google it. Okay. So what do you guys think? Circle of influence, control, concern, some of each. If you're adding things to the curriculum. And not saying it's bad or good, but is that something you have control over? Is it just influence or just something to be concerned about? Yeah. Yeah. So that's under your control. Not saying it's bad, but just know that, when you do those things, you're extending that unit a little more. All right. So this is I'd like to talk to you about phenomenon-based learning takes time, because this is a really interesting piece of research that's coming out of Michigan State. And it has a lot to do with how we feel like the units take too long. So in an NGSS curriculum, kids are not just learning the DCIs. They're also using the practices and the cross-cutting concepts. And if we want them to learn the practices, we have to let them practice the practices, and that takes time, right? So they're generating questions, they're gathering evidence in a lab, they're sharing their evidence. That takes time. It's not just me throwing the notes up on the board, right? We're taking a whole class period, maybe to draw our models and share them and discuss them. We're constructing explanations, as groups, and then we're applying it. So we're not just talking about it once, we're talking about it again in terms of, in the Connect, usually in terms of the unit challenge. And so these are, best practices that the research shows this is the best way for kids to learn, and adults too, actually. But they do take time. And then kids often, and adults will be like, this is taking forever. So Dr. Christy Morrison Thomas is out of MSU, and she just got her doctorate maybe about a year ago, and her doctoral study had to do with fast versus slow thinking and how that applies in an NGSS science classroom. And so this fast versus slow thinking concept comes from this pretty famous book by a economist, Daniel Kahneman. And he claims that we have two systems going in our brain. We have fast thinking, and that's how we really pretty much manage everything day to day. It's fast, intuitive thinking. Your gut says do it, you do it. Quick actions. You don't necessarily have complete information, but you can't, you can't wait and do a deep research when, you're deciding, am I going to turn left or right at this light and there's oncoming traffic or whatever, right? So we do a lot of fast thinking. We also have part of our brain that is capable of doing slow, effortful thinking for deliberate decision making. And the economist says, hey, this is how you should run your business, right? Don't make random fast decisions. Do the slow, effortful thinking. How that impacts us in science is that science is by nature slow and effortful thinking. It is we're going to be careful about it. We're going to double check. We're going to check our resources. We're going to carefully construct an explanation. But that slow, effortful thinking demands time and energy. It demands attentional resources that kids aren't used to being asked to use, and they kind of rebel against it. Like, this is too hard. This is too much work. This is exhausting. This is taking forever. And so part of what takes so long is what's built in to a good NGSS science curriculum. Science practices, by their nature, slow down thinking. And it's an important thing that we don't want to lose in our classroom, right? So kids will experience something that Christy calls phenomenon fatigue. They're like tired of thinking about this. I'm tired of thinking about this. I'm done. Can't we just solve, make a suggestion to solve the problem and move on? Well, you could, but that wouldn't be the scientific slow thinking way to do it, right? And we want kids to have that experience. So they are going to be uncomfortable sometimes, and they are going to be a little antsy sometimes. And it might seem like it takes a long time sometimes, but some of that is by design. And so what really sealed the deal for me is Chrissy did research, and she did it in Michigan high schools. And she looked at teachers who were teaching NGSS curriculum, great teachers, well-respected, kids like them, parents like them. They were seen as successful professionals in their community. But she started looking at their identifying stories, like how did they see themselves as teachers? What did they think was the most important thing they were doing for their kids? And she separated them into one group who said the most important thing is that my students are active, motivated learners. Sounds great. I would have signed up for that, right? Want your kids to be engaged. But then she had another group that said, the most important thing for me is to help my students make sense of phenomenon. And so what she found when she compared, they did a bunch of, I think, common assessments within the buildings. What she found was the teachers in the higher learning gains classrooms were the ones that were on the right side here, that their most important thing was they were going to help their students make sense of phenomena, regardless of whether they were entertained all the time or not. And so those teachers who thought my kids are active and motivated and engaged, their kids still learned, but their test scores weren't as good. And so there is tremendous value in making your kids do some slow thinking sometimes and helping yourself feel comfortable with, yeah, this has taken a while, but it's because we're doing slow thinking. And in the long run, it's better for your kids. So the fact that NGSS instruction is designed to be a slow thinking process, to use those SEPs, consider those CCCs, is that something that you can control, you can influence, or is it outside of your circle of control? It's something that you can't change. Maybe we don't even want to change. But that fact that NGSS is designed to be slow, is that circle of concern, influence, or control? All right, I see some influence. All right. So you can take that knowledge and then you can maybe adjust the way you are doing things a little bit or the way you think about things so that everybody feels a little more comfortable. All right. And I threw this slide in here. This is a presentation that we did in October, and we're going to do it again at MSTA. And we're supposed to be publishing a white paper in the next couple months on this. We've done some preliminary research, not me personally, but Tony, who's on our MyStar team. And MyStar schools compared to other schools in Michigan, middle schools in Michigan, similar schools that don't use MyStar schools have better MSTEP scores. Fairly significantly, fairly solidly. And if that's something you're interested in, Lindsay and I can get you the slide set from the presentation in October. But so do the slow thinking. Don't let that change the way you're doing things. All right. So let's do some practice here, thinking about being realistic. So part of this is, we're too hard on ourselves. We set these expectations, or we read, hey, this is supposed to take me 3 to 4 class periods and it's taking me 5 or 6. So some of them are the expectations, that we see other people say. Some of them are, we just put it on ourselves. Some of it is, the kids are like, can we speed this up? But let's be realistic. So I did an imaginary planning book kind of plan here through Monday through Friday. And this is starting with, say we already did the intro lesson 1 in a new unit. Now we're starting lesson 2. And I would often plan this way. And then of course it always took longer. I was always crossing things out and pushing them to the next day. But theoretically, sometimes in perfect MyStar world, we think, yeah, the anchor is going to take 10 minutes. The Uncover Lab is going to be 40 minutes. So that's one class period. And then the next day, we're going to create group models, do a gallery walk, and have a consensus discussion. And then the next day, we're going to do that unit summary table and vocabulary, 20 minutes, get it out, get it done. And then we'll do the connect activity because that's about a half an hour. And hey, there's your 50 minutes. So we're going to assume you have like a 50-minute period here. And then on Thursday, we'll do the check your progress and do all of that bubble map stuff and the navigation routine. And we'll probably have time to do the 10-minute anchor for the next lesson. It's just a video and a short discussion. All right. So this is in my magical thinking head, how I would often plan a week. So I'd like you to look at this, and I'm going to put you in your teams again. What do you see on slide 43? What do you agree with? What would you like to change? What are some things that we're not accounting for when we're doing this to ourselves, right? We're planning it and then it's not working out. What are we not thinking about? So I'm going to put you into rooms, take a few minutes, look at this slide 43. And then on either 44 or 45, jot some thoughts down. We'll take about 5 minutes to do that. All right. So thanks. Yeah. So I see some really good points here, the things that were not really included. And I was totally guilty of this, giving kids think time, having that wait time, helping kids to generate questions. Kids want to share things, and that can be a real trick. You want them to be engaged, but you know that you can't take a half an hour to hear the stories. So and then transitioning. One of the reasons we changed, I don't know if anybody ever really read the lesson plans, but we used to ask that teachers would get out that unit summary table at the end of the Uncover, at the end of the share, at the end of the connect. And I said, wait, guys, every time you do a transition like that, you're adding 5 or 10 minutes for middle school kids because they can't find it. They lost their pencil. They need to go to their locker, whatever. Can we just do it once? And so in the new versions, you only take out that unit summary table once and it's at the end of the share, but that's specifically because transition time. So the general flow you agree with, I appreciate that. kind of follow the lesson plans. The vocabulary is embedded. Yeah. So I always just would put the science words up on the board and have the kids write them in their packet after we had used them in conversation. But yeah, you should not be, spending extra time necessarily often on vocabulary. You would not add the anchor for lesson 3 at the end. Yeah, you can always save it for another day. You do have to kind of manage though, because you kind of have to know what's coming up, because a lot of times if you start the anchor one day, you don't have quite enough time left to do that Uncover Lab and you're left with that awkward space. And so one of the things that I learned over time to do is when I would tack that anchor at the end of a lesson so that the next day I'd have the whole class period for the Uncover. So it just kind of depends on how long that Uncover is going to take, how you might try to squeeze that. Gathering materials, yeah, it can take kids forever, it's in my locker. Can I go get it? I can't find it. SEL moments, yep. Announcements, yes. Principal, yeah, well, because his meeting was really important, great, but it messed up my day. So, all right. So what is MyStar doing to save time? We heard loud and clear that the stuff was taking too long. We can't make it not NGSS. So it is going to take time, but there were some economies that we could make. So the enhanced units, almost to a single one, have fewer lessons than the original ones. And often it's because we combined an Uncover share. We have 2 Uncover shares, but that shortened things up. The assessment team made the assessments shorter. The navigation guides and routines may not make things shorter if you stop and talk about it for 5 or 10 minutes, but it will help kids with that storyline coherency. And so we've done those things as much as we can, but you can't streamline the NGSS out of it, or your kids will not get that benefit. It'll show in their test scores, probably. So, you have to allow kids to have that time. We're going to skip this because I want to make sure that we don't go over. But maybe we have time to do this. Yeah, we have time. I'm sorry. I thought it was 4:58 or 4:48. So we'll just take 5 or 10 minutes and think about this. So let's practice realistic lesson planning. So what I showed you before was, La La Land, imaginary magic lesson planning. So if you have lesson 2 and lesson 3 as described here, I made them kind of generic. Do at least 1 week. And we'll see if we have time for the second week. I might call you back, but start with the first week, start with lesson 2. And how would you place those in your lesson book or your lesson planner, or however you keep your lessons? So week 1 and week 2 you have to work with, and how far could you get, and where would you place those things? All right, so I'm going to put you in your groups again and take a little bit of a look at that, and we'll just kind of practice being realistic. All right, everybody's back. Thanks. So I hope that just gave you a little chance to chat with some other people and kind of think about thinking about this a little more realistically. I especially, Lindsay and I were just talking, team 1 pulled out, they put that reading assignment, gave it basically a full day on its own. And so if you're going to do those DRGs in class, you got to remember that that's not going to probably happen the same hour that you do the share consensus discussion and the UST and the vocabulary words and all of that other stuff. And so, give yourself some breathing room. And one of the things that I started doing after a while is I would plan for 4 days and I would leave 1 day as a slush day, knowing that I probably was going to need it. And we got enough problems in our lives and in our worlds without being disappointed in ourselves on a regular basis, right? So, be realistic and expect that things are going to take longer for a number of reasons. A lot of them are outside of your control. And then, when it is within your control, make good decisions. If it's something that you need to do it. But just know that might slow things down a little bit. I had my daughter got married 10 years ago, quite a while ago now. And all the bridesmaids were in my kitchen the day of the wedding in the morning. And they're like, Mrs. Gear, you've been married a long, long time. What's the secret to a happy marriage? And I said, lower your expectations. And they all laughed. And I'm like, I'm dead serious. And so do that a little bit for yourself. Don't get yourself all wrapped up and upset about things that you can't control. There's a lot of things that you have to just expect. It's not all going to go as quickly as you think, and don't let that cause you stress, because there's enough stress in our lives. All right, so on slide 50, if you would just jot if there's one thing that you can take away from today, and then Lindsay and I have just a few housekeeping things and we'll let you go. All right. Give yourself grace and be realistic. Absolutely. It's more important to teach students to think than to cover it all. Absolutely. Yes. And your test scores will not disappoint you if you teach them to think. And that's often really hard for people in education to accept. But we've got some proof now. So it's okay if you're off on the time and pacing. The thinking is more important. Yeah. And that timing and pacing is probably unrealistic to begin with, whether you decided it or the MyStar people decided it. Be flexible with your schedule. Plan for the unexpected. Yeah. So many things in your life are the will of the organization, and you got to let it go. Don't let it eat at you. CCCs and SCPs over DCIs, absolutely. And NGSS takes slow thinking. All right. Questions? Anybody want to shout out anything that they're thinking about that we could answer for you?
I think you addressed this question in an email or one of your updates, but if teachers are currently not using the updated version of a unit, do they have to request it from you, or is it automatic, will automatically show up in their teacher list?
If they're using the older version?
Yeah, if they haven't used the updated version of anything yet.
Okay, so as the updated, yeah, we just had, in fact, it was the email I think that Marianne sent out this morning. So if you say, for example, you've taught unit 6-7 for several years, because you've requested that unit in the past, you will automatically get access as one of your units to the new version. But you still can have access to the old version. We have them archived, and there's a link on each unit homepage. Lindsay's nodding because she does all this for the archived version. So you'll always have the option for both. If you've never taught unit 6-7 and you request it after January 31st, you'll automatically get the new version. You will not get the old version unless you ask for it, click on it, the archive link on the homepage. So we're trying to be flexible and give teachers, you know, what they want. And we hope they will choose the newer stuff, but anyone else? All right, Lindsay and I will hang out for a few minutes afterwards too, if you think of something or you want to just, you know, chat privately. I do have a list here of, we've done this kind of presentation on this topic a number of times because it continues to be a source of kind of stress and concern for teachers. And so we do have a few other resources, the slides, and some of them, we have the videos too, if that's of any use for you. Lots of stuff coming up, productive talk, CERs, couple of CERs. We have a phase 2, the basic one, and then we have a MyStar Learning series. We're going to talk about the off-the-shelf lessons specifically in the CERs. And then we have an assessment series, which is, I think, going to be really cool. Barb's going to talk about things you can do in your classroom to practice with your kids for 3D tests, including STEP. Like you can teach them the structure and how they can use that to get the, you know, really good answers and things like that. So those are some things that are coming up, and they're all on your dashboard. We will be at MSTA. We have 5 or 6 presentations. Lindsay, yeah, quite a few. So if you're coming to MSTA, stop by and say hi. And this is our Facebook plug. We do have a private Facebook group. And Barb posts something almost every day, and you're welcome to post things and respond to teachers and things like that. It is only for people with MyStar subscriptions. So trying to keep it a kind of a safe space. That's what we have for you. If you would like to give us feedback, we're always happy to have that. There's a link here on this last slide. And other than that, thanks for your time. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. Hopefully we'll see you again soon. And if there is something you want to chat with us about, you know, hang out for a minute or two, and we'd be happy to talk to you. But if not, we'll see you again soon.